You're just jealous your daughter didn't turn out like my Tyler, Deborah Simmons sneered, her perfectly manicured hand motioning toward her son, who stood smugly by the refreshment table at the Millstone Creek Community Hall. The room fell into a hush. 15 years of neighborly pretense collapsed in an instant. I could feel the blood rushing to my ears, not from shame, but fury. Years of quiet. Sacrifice. Dismissed with one sentence. The folding chairs creaked as neighbors leaned in, eyes flitting between us like spectators at a tennis match. I rose from my seat slowly. Calm, controlled. My voice didn't tremble. Actually, I said, reaching into my worn leather tote bag, I've paid over $61,000 to help your son succeed, since his first year in college. Silence. Deborah's fake smile vanished. Even Mayor Holloway coughed and reached for his water, and I brought the receipts. The September evening had started like any other monthly community meeting in Millstone Creek. The same beige walls, the same fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the same folding chairs arranged in neat rows. I'd arrived early as usual, settling into my spot in the third row, visible enough to participate, inconspicuous enough to avoid attention. Emily, my daughter, had texted she'd be late, covering Trish's shift at the diner again. Sorry, Mom. Save me a seat? I'd placed my cardigan on the chair beside me. At 24, Emily still attended these meetings, supporting my quiet campaign for the library annex. She knew what it meant to me. Mayor Holloway had just moved to item 4 on the agenda, the proposed library expansion, when Deborah took the floor uninvited. Before we waste time discussing another community project that'll never get funded, she announced, her voice carrying that artificial sweetness that made my teeth ache, I'd like to share some exciting news about community representation. She straightened her silk blouse, designer label visible at the collar. My son, Tyler, has been invited to join the Governor's Youth Leadership Council. He'll be representing not just Millstone Creek, but our entire county. Polite applause rippled through the room. Tyler, standing by the refreshment table in his crisp button-down and khakis, nodded with practiced humility. Tyler's also secured preliminary approval for 3 community grants, Deborah continued, which could bring real improvement to our neighborhood, not just pipe dreams. Her eyes found mine, lingered. Some people understand what it takes to raise successful children who contribute meaningfully to society. I felt the familiar knot tighten in my stomach. 15 years of these subtle digs. 15 years of watching Deborah craft her narrative of superiority. Mayor Holloway cleared his throat. That's wonderful news, Deborah. We'll certainly discuss those grants when they're finalized. Now, regarding the library annex proposal, I'm sorry, Deborah interrupted, but I have to say, some proposals feel more like personal pet projects than community necessities. She gestured vaguely in my direction. I understand Rachel's attachment to the library since Emily works there part-time, but we should prioritize initiatives with broader impact. I stared down at my notepad, filled with carefully researched figures on community literacy rates and accessibility needs. 6 months of work, dismissed in a sentence. My Tyler could tell you, Deborah continued, professional success requires vision beyond small-town thinking. Perhaps if more parents encouraged ambition instead of complacency, that's when something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the quiet breaking of a dam that had held back too much for too long. I stood up. The room quieted. I was not someone who typically commanded attention. Deborah, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, I'd like to respond to that. Surprise flickered across her face before settling into that condescending smile. Of course, Rachel, though I wasn't singling anyone out. I opened my tote bag and removed a 3-inch binder, bound in blue, edges worn from frequent handling. I think it's time we clarify a few things about Tyler's success. Mayor Holloway leaned forward, sensing the shift in the room's energy. Ms. Monroe, perhaps we should return to the agenda. This will only take a moment, I assured him, opening the binder to the first tabbed section. Since we're discussing community investment and success, I turned to face the room of 40 neighbors I'd lived alongside for 15 years. People who saw me at the grocery store, at school functions, at summer barbecues. People who knew me only as quiet Rachel Monroe, the widow with the unremarkable daughter. Tyler Simmons is indeed successful, I began. He graduated from state with honors, secured an excellent position at Crawford and Mitchell, drives a new BMW, and now sits on prestigious committees. I know these details intimately because I've helped fund much of it. Confusion rippled through the room. Deborah's smile froze. When Tyler was a sophomore in college, I continued, Deborah came to me in tears. There was a tuition shortfall. Tyler might need to drop out. It was temporary, she said. Just until tax season. I flipped to the first page in my binder. This is a copy of my first transfer to Millstone Community Bank. $5,400. Deborah stood abruptly. Rachel, this is completely inappropriate. Each semester brought a new emergency, I continued. Books, housing deposits, professional clothes for interviews, car payments when Tyler's internship required reliable transportation, student loan payments that were crushing Deborah's credit score. I turned the pages methodically. Tuition, $23,400. Books and supplies, $6,000. Apartment rent, $12,000. Car payments, $3,600. Student loan payoffs, $9,000. Professional wardrobe and extras, $7,000. The mathematical precision of my record-keeping seemed to stun the room into silence. Total, $61,000. Money that came from my savings, from my second job, from the fund I'd been building for Emily's education. I looked directly at Deborah for the first time. Money that was always just until next month, or just until the bonus comes through. Money that never returned. Tyler's face had gone pale. Mom? His voice cracked slightly. What is she talking about? That's when I realized he hadn't known. Not everything, at least. Deborah's perfectly composed facade cracked. You're twisting things. Tyler, she's just bitter because Emily never... While Deborah was throwing graduation parties with catered sushi, I said quietly, I was postponing dental surgery to pay Tyler's rent. I closed the binder. I wasn't jealous of Tyler's success. I helped create it. The morning after the community meeting, I woke to an unusual sound. Silence. No alarm, no rushing to get ready for work. I'd called in sick, something I rarely did in 15 years at Millstone Elementary, where I managed the school's front office. The digital clock read 9:17 a.m. Beside it, my phone blinked with notifications. 17 text messages, 5 voicemails, 38 email notifications. Millstone Creek had approximately 2,000 residents. News traveled faster than light. I pulled the blanket over my head, remembering the stunned faces as I'd walked out of the community center last night. Mayor Holloway calling after me. Emily arriving just in time to see me leaving, confusion written across her face when I handed her the binder and whispered, Take this home. I'll explain everything. The explanation had taken hours. Emily sitting cross-legged on our living room floor, carefully examining each receipt, each bank statement, each handwritten note from Deborah promising repayment. All this time, Emily had whispered, when we couldn't afford my student loans, when I had to work double shifts, when you kept saying we were just a bit tight this month, I hadn't known how to respond. What mother admits to her child that she'd diverted resources meant for her future? The bedroom door creaked open. Emily stood there, 2 mugs of coffee in hand, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun. At 24, she looked so much like her father it sometimes stole my breath. You're awake, she said, offering me a steaming mug. I called the school, told them you had food poisoning. I accepted the coffee gratefully. Thanks. She perched on the edge of the bed. Mrs. Denning from across the street dropped off banana bread. Said she's been meaning to thank you for helping with her Medicare paperwork last year. I nodded, unsurprised by the transparent excuse. And Mr. Collins called to say the garden committee unanimously voted to accept your rose bush donation, which is weird because you never offered one. A small smile tugged at my lips despite everything. Anything else? Emily's expression grew serious. Tyler called, twice. Left a voicemail saying he needs to talk to you. He sounded devastated. I closed my eyes briefly. This was the part I hadn't fully anticipated. The collateral damage. Tyler had always been polite to me. Always sent thank you cards for birthday checks. Always helped carry groceries when we crossed paths. I'd never blamed him for his mother's manipulation. I'll call him back, I said. Later. Emily fidgeted with her coffee mug. Mom, why didn't you ever tell me? All these years. The question hung between us, heavy with unspoken accusations. Why had I prioritized another child's future over hers? Why had I let her struggle with community college and diner shifts while funding Tyler's prestigious university experience? It started small, I said finally. Just 1 semester. Deborah was crying in my kitchen about how Tyler might have to drop out, how all his hard work would be wasted. She promised to pay it back once her divorce settlement came through. Sipped my coffee, remembering that rainy afternoon, Deborah's mascara-streaked face, the desperate edge in her voice. By the time I realized the money wasn't coming back, I was already invested, emotionally and financially, and I kept thinking, what would your father have done? Emily's eyes softened at the mention of her father. James had been gone for 18 years now, a construction accident, when Emily was just 6. His life insurance had kept us afloat initially, but it wasn't enough for the long haul. Dad would have helped, Emily said softly, but not at our expense. The truth of that statement hit me hard. James had been generous but fiercely protective of his family. He would have helped the Simmons family, but he would have set boundaries I had failed to establish. I made a mistake, I admitted. I thought I was being kind, neighborly, the way your father always was, but I let it go too far, and I was too embarrassed to admit it. Emily reached for my hand. But why confront her now? After all these years? I thought about the community meeting, about Deborah's smug dismissal of the library project, about the years of subtle and not-so-subtle comparisons between our children. It wasn't planned, I confessed, but when she stood there implying you weren't successful, that I was a failure as a mother, something just broke loose. My phone buzzed again. Another text message. Emily glanced at the screen. It's Mayor Holloway. Says he needs to discuss recent developments with you. I set the phone aside. He can wait. The whole town is talking, Mom. Emily's voice carried a note of concern. Deborah's telling people you're having some kind of breakdown, that you've been obsessively tracking small loans and blowing them out of proportion. Of course she was. Deborah Simmons had spent 15 years crafting her image as Millstone Creek's most devoted mother and community leader. She wouldn't surrender that narrative easily. The receipts tell the truth, I said simply. Emily hesitated. What happens now? It was the question I'd been asking myself all night. What did happen when you publicly exposed 15 years of financial manipulation? When you revealed that the town's golden boy had unknowingly built his success on your sacrifice? I don't know, I admitted. But I'm done hiding. As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Through the bedroom window, I could see a familiar BMW parked at the curb. Tyler Simmons stood on my porch, shoulders hunched, looking nothing like the confident young professional from last night's meeting. It's Tyler, Emily said unnecessarily. I nodded, setting my coffee aside. I should talk to him. Want me to stay? I considered the offer, tempted by the buffer my daughter's presence would provide. But this conversation had been 15 years in the making. No, I decided. This is between Tyler and me. I pulled on my robe, ran a hand through my hair, and headed downstairs to face the first consequence of my long-overdue honesty. Tyler Simmons stood on my porch looking nothing like the polished young professional who had graced countless community events. His hair was disheveled, his eyes rimmed with red, his normally pristine button-down wrinkled as if he'd slept in it. Mrs. Monroe, he said when I opened the door. His voice cracked slightly. Can I please talk to you? I stepped aside silently, allowing him into the modest home he'd visited countless times as a child, back when he and Emily would ride bikes together through the neighborhood, before high school social hierarchies and college ambitions had pulled them in different directions. Would you like some coffee? I asked, maintaining the politeness that had been my shield for so long. He shook his head. No, thank you. I haven't slept. We settled in the living room. Me in James's old armchair, Tyler perched awkwardly on the edge of the sofa where Emily had spent hours last night examining the evidence of my years-long financial assistance to him. I didn't know, he said finally, his eyes meeting mine with painful honesty. About most of it, at least. Mom told me she'd taken out parent loans, that she was handling the finances. I believed him. The shock on his face last night had been too raw, too genuine to be fabricated. I knew about some help, he continued. The first semester when Dad left and things were tight, the suit for my Morgan Stanley interview. But the car, the apartment, the loan payments? He shook his head in disbelief. She said it was all covered by the divorce settlement. I thought about all the times Deborah had told me the settlement money was just around the corner, delayed by legal technicalities or her ex-husband's obstinance. Another story in her elaborate web of manipulation. I trusted her, I said simply. We were friends, or I thought we were. When she told me she needed help, I believed her. Tyler ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his teenage self that for a moment I saw the gangly 16-year-old who'd sat at my kitchen table studying for SATs while I baked cookies. Why? He asked. Why would you do that for us, especially? When he glanced around at my modest home with its secondhand furniture and outdated appliances. When you could have used that money for yourselves? It was the question at the heart of everything, the one Emily had asked last night, the one I'd been asking myself for years. It started with genuine concern, I explained. Your mother was distraught about you potentially dropping out. I had thought some savings, and I thought, what's a community for if not to help each other through rough patches? I paused, searching for words to explain a decision that seemed increasingly incomprehensible with each passing year. After James died, so many people helped us. Casseroles appeared on our doorstep. People shoveled our driveway in winter. The hardware store owner gave Emily a bicycle at cost price for her birthday. I wanted to pay that kindness forward. Tyler nodded slowly. But it went beyond kindness. $61,000 isn't a casserole, Mrs. Monroe. No, I agreed. It isn't. The truth is, once I started, it became harder to stop. Your mother would tell me about your accomplishments, your internship offers, your dean's list placement, and I felt invested, like I was part of something important. I didn't tell him about the darker side, how the financial assistance had become tangled with guilt, with my own insecurities as a single mother, with Deborah's masterful manipulation of my vulnerabilities. I'm so sorry, Tyler said, his voice barely above a whisper. I had no idea what my success was costing you, costing Emily. At the mention of my daughter, I felt a familiar pang. How many opportunities had Emily missed because I'd diverted resources to Tyler? How many times had she worked double shifts while I secretly paid Tyler's rent? Emily is remarkable, I said firmly. She's built her life through hard work and persistence. I'm incredibly proud of her. Tyler's expression shifted, a mixture of shame and resolve settling across his features. I need to make this right. I have a good job now. I can start repaying you immediately. The offer surprised me, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Despite everything, Tyler had grown into a decent young man. It's not about the money, I began. But it is, he interrupted, an intensity in his voice I hadn't heard before. Maybe not for you, but for me. I can't undo the past, but I can take responsibility for it. Please, Mrs. Monroe, let me do this. Before I could respond, the sound of a car door slamming echoed from outside. Through the living room window, I watched Deborah marching up my walkway, her face set in determined lines. Tyler followed my gaze and stood quickly. I'll handle this. He met his mother at the door before she could ring the bell. Their voices carried through the screen door. Deborah's shrill with indignation, Tyler's low but firm. Making a spectacle of yourself, Deborah was saying. This is exactly what she wants, to drive a wedge between us. Mom, stop. Tyler's voice cut through her tirade. I've seen the receipts. I've seen the emails you sent her promising repayment. It wasn't like that. She's twisting things. I saw your signature on the IOUs, Mom. Your handwriting hasn't changed since you used to sign my permission slips. I stayed in my armchair, feeling oddly detached from the drama unfolding on my porch. For 15 years, I'd feared this confrontation, feared the loss of face, the community judgment, the potential destruction of relationships. Now that it was happening, I felt nothing but a strange sense of relief. The door opened, and Tyler ushered his reluctant mother inside. Deborah's normally perfect appearance showed signs of strain, her lipstick slightly smudged, her designer blouse misbuttoned at the top. Rachel, she said stiffly, I think we need to clear the air about your presentation last night. I gestured toward the sofa. Please sit. She remained standing. I don't appreciate you airing our private financial arrangements in public. It was completely inappropriate and has caused significant distress to my family. I almost laughed at the audacity. Private financial arrangements? Is that what we're calling it now? Mom, Tyler warned quietly. We agreed you would apologize. Deborah's expression tightened. I'm sorry if you felt our arrangement wasn't properly acknowledged, but turning this into a public spectacle. Do you know what Emily was doing while I was paying Tyler's rent? I interrupted, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. Working overnight shifts at the diner, taking online classes because we couldn't afford full-time tuition, applying for scholarships she never got because her mother couldn't afford the right extracurriculars or SAT prep courses. Deborah's face flushed. That's hardly my fault. We all make choices as parents. Yes, I agreed. We do. And for 15 years, I chose to believe you were my friend, that you would honor your promises, that your gratitude was genuine. Tyler stepped forward. Mom, please, just tell her the truth. Something in Deborah seemed to deflate then. Not contrition exactly, but the recognition that her carefully constructed narrative was crumbling. Fine, she said tightly. I should have repaid you. I meant to, initially. But things were always tight, and Tyler had so many opportunities that required investment. And it was easier to take advantage of my generosity than admit you couldn't afford the lifestyle you were projecting. I finished for her. She flinched, but didn't deny it. I'm prepared to arrange repayment, she said, her tone shifting to businesslike. Though I think the figure you quoted is somewhat inflated. It's not inflated, Tyler interrupted. I've seen the documentation, and I'll be handling the repayment personally, from my own salary. Deborah turned to her son, surprise evident in her expression. Tyler, that's not necessary. We can work out a family solution. This is my solution, he said firmly. My education, my responsibility. In that moment, I saw something shift between mother and son, a rebalancing of power, a recognition of uncomfortable truths long buried beneath Deborah's carefully crafted narrative of perfect motherhood. The following week brought a strange new reality. My phone rang constantly with calls from neighbors I'd barely spoken to in years. Ellen from the garden committee left a voicemail apologizing for not seeing what was happening. Mark and Judith Baker invited me to dinner. Long overdue, according to their text message. At work, the principal stopped by my desk with coffee and a quiet, "If you ever need to talk." The school secretary who'd worked alongside me for a decade squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "I always knew there was more to you than met the Emily called it the Rachel Renaissance. Suddenly, everyone's discovering my mom is actually amazing, she said over breakfast one morning, her tone a mixture of pride and protective indignation. Where were they all these years? I understood her resentment. While I'd been quietly supporting Tyler, Emily had been the one truly by my side, helping with household chores when I worked late, never complaining about our financial limitations, defending me when classmates made comments about her boring mother. People see what they're prepared to see, I told her. Deborah was loud, I was quiet. It's human nature to notice the squeaky wheel. Well, you're certainly being noticed now, Emily said, sliding her phone across the table to show me a community Facebook group where debate about the community meeting revelation continued to dominate discussion. I pushed the phone back without reading the comments. I didn't do this for attention. I know, Emily said softly. But maybe a little attention isn't such a bad thing. Later that day, Mayor Holloway requested a meeting at his office in the small municipal building downtown. I'd been expecting this, as Millstone Creek's unofficial social coordinator. Deborah had wielded significant influence in local government circles for years. The mayor's assistant ushered me into his wood-paneled office with unusual deference. Mayor Holloway himself stood when I entered, gesturing toward a leather chair across from his desk. Rachel, thank you for coming, he said, his usual bombastic tone noticeably subdued. Can I offer you coffee? Water? I'm fine, thank you, I replied, settling into the chair and placing my handbag, the same worn leather tote that had carried my revelatory binder, at my feet. The mayor cleared his throat. I wanted to discuss what happened at the community meeting. First, to apologize for not intervening when Deborah made those inappropriate comments about you and Emily. I nodded, waiting. Second, to address the library annex proposal. He shuffled through some papers on his desk. After reviewing your research on community literacy needs and accessibility issues, I've decided to fast-track the project for the next budget cycle. Surprise momentarily robbed me of words. The library annex had been my quiet passion project for years, a proposed extension that would create dedicated spaces for adult education classes, children's reading programs, and technology access for low-income residents. Despite my detailed proposals and persistent advocacy, it had always been shuffled to the bottom of community priorities. That's unexpected, I managed finally. Mayor Holloway had the grace to look slightly ashamed. I've been reviewing our community development approach, and I realize we've perhaps been too influenced by certain vocal perspectives. Translation. Deborah's priorities had dominated community funding decisions for years. The library serves everyone, I said, recovering my composure. It's one of the few truly democratic institutions we have. Precisely, the mayor agreed, seeming relieved by my professional response. Which brings me to my third point. I'd like to offer you a position on the Community Development Advisory Board. I blinked in surprise. The board that determines funding priorities for Millstone Creek? He nodded. We need more voices like yours. Thoughtful, research-driven, concerned with equity, and frankly, someone with your demonstrated financial responsibility would be an asset. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I'd been excluded. From community leadership positions, my quieter approach dismissed as lack of initiative. Now, my most private financial missteps had somehow qualified me for a seat at the table. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully. But I hope you understand my hesitation. I've just had my personal financial decisions scrutinized very publicly. Taking on a role that involves community fund allocation feels like opening yourself to more scrutiny. The mayor finished for me. I understand, but consider this. Your perspective is valuable precisely because you understand both generosity and its limits. That's something our board has lacked. I promised to consider the offer, though my thoughts were already turning to the potential good I could do in such a position. Ensuring community. Resources were distributed equitably, advocating for overlooked needs, creating transparency in funding decisions. As I left the municipal building, I checked my phone to find a text from Emily. Library called. They want to interview me for the full-time children's program coordinator position. Did you pull strings? I smiled, typing back, Absolutely not. This is all you. And it was true. Despite everything, I'd always been careful not to use what little influence I had to advantage Emily unfairly. Her achievements were her own, hard-won through persistence and genuine talent. Walking home, I passed Millstone Creek Park where weekend youth soccer games were in full swing. Parents clustered along the sidelines, cheering and chatting. I spotted Deborah among them, standing slightly apart from the usual social circles, her designer sunglasses in place despite the overcast day. Our eyes met briefly across the field. She gave a small, tight nod before turning away. Some wounds wouldn't heal quickly. Perhaps some never would. But in that brief acknowledgement, I sensed something had fundamentally shifted in our community's dynamic. The carefully maintained hierarchy had crumbled, revealing a more complex reality beneath. As I continued my walk home, several parents waved or called out greetings, people who had previously known me only as Emily's mom or the quiet lady from the elementary school office. Their newfound attention was both gratifying and uncomfortable. Rachel, we missed you at book club last month, called Sandra Phillips, a woman who had never actually invited me to her monthly book discussions. The library annex is such a wonderful idea, enthused Michael Clemens, whose children I'd checked in at the elementary school for years without him ever learning my name. I smiled and nodded, responding politely while continuing my path home. The attention would fade eventually, I knew. Human nature being what it was, some new drama would eventually eclipse mine. But perhaps something more lasting would remain, a recalibration of how my community saw me and how I saw myself. When I reached my modest two-bedroom home, I found Tyler sitting on the front steps, a manila envelope in his hands. Mrs. Monroe, he said, standing as I approached. I hope you don't mind me waiting. I wanted to give you this in person. He handed me the envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $5,000 and a payment schedule outlining monthly transfers to follow. It's a start, he said simply. I've set up automatic payments from my account. The full amount will take about 2 years to repay. I studied the young man before me, so earnest, so determined to right a wrong he hadn't fully understood until days ago. Tyler, I began. This isn't necessary. It is, he interrupted gently. Not just for you, but for me. For my integrity. I understood then that this wasn't solely about the money. It was about Tyler reclaiming his narrative, separating his genuine achievements from the manufactured success story his mother had crafted. I've also been thinking, he continued, about what I can do beyond repayment. I've contacted the community college, about mentoring first-generation college students, and I'd like to talk to Emily about possibly collaborating on a financial literacy program at the library. The suggestion took me by surprise. You and Emily haven't really been close since high school. Tyler nodded, a hint of regret crossing his features. Another thing I'd like to correct, if she's willing. We grew up together and I've missed her perspective. As he spoke, I realized that in exposing the financial entanglement between our families, I had inadvertently freed not just myself, but Tyler too, from expectations and narratives that had constrained us both for far too long. I think she'd be open to that, I said, accepting the envelope. She's always been remarkably forgiving. Like her father, I thought but didn't say. James had always believed in second chances and seeing the best in people despite their mistakes. It was one of the qualities I'd loved most about him, and one of the vulnerabilities Deborah had exploited in me after his death. Tyler thanked me and turned to leave, then paused. Mrs. Monroe, for what it's worth, I think my dad would have been ashamed of how this all played out. He always respected you. Said, you were the kind of neighbor who made Millstone Creek feel like a real community. With that, he headed to his car, leaving me standing on my porch with an envelope containing the first installment of a debt I'd never expected to be repaid. 1 month after the community meeting revelation, I found myself in unfamiliar territory, both literally and figuratively. The Community Development Advisory. Board met in the executive conference room of Millstone Creek's only bank building, a space I'd previously entered only to discuss my dwindling mortgage options with loan officers. Tonight, I sat at a gleaming mahogany table alongside 7 other board members, a leather portfolio, a gift from Emily, open before me. Inside were my carefully prepared notes on 3 funding proposals, including a revised plan for the library annex. Rachel, would you like to present the library project assessment? Mayor Holloway asked, his tone carrying none of the dismissiveness that had characterized our previous interactions. I nodded, distributing copies of my analysis. As you can see from the demographic breakdown, the proposed annex would serve populations currently underrepresented in our community programs, particularly senior citizens and school-age children from the East Side neighborhoods. The east side of Millstone Creek had always been the less affluent area, home to apartment complexes and modest single-family homes like mine. For years, community resources had disproportionately benefited the western neighborhoods where larger homes, like Deborah's, lined streets with actual sidewalks and decorative street lamps. Your cost analysis is remarkably thorough, noted Catherine Winters, the bank's vice president and the board's longest-serving member. I particularly appreciate the phased implementation approach. It makes the project much more financially feasible. And your literacy program data is compelling, added Dr. Martinez from the school district. These are exactly the kind of evidence-based proposals we need. The validation was disorienting after years of having my ideas politely shelved. I'd grown so accustomed to being overlooked that being seen, truly seen, felt almost uncomfortable. As the meeting progressed, I found myself speaking up more frequently, asking pointed questions about resource allocation, challenging assumptions about community needs, and advocating for transparency in decision-making. Before we vote on final budget recommendations, I said near the meeting's end, I'd like to propose we host a community feedback session. Not just another meeting where the usual voices dominate, but a structured forum where we actively solicit input from underrepresented groups. Mayor Holloway looked surprised, but not displeased. That's not our usual process, Rachel. Which might explain why our usual process tends to benefit the same segments of our community year after year, I replied evenly. A silence followed, not hostile, but thoughtful. Then Catherine Winters nodded. She's right. We've become complacent in our outreach. I support Rachel's proposal. The motion passed unanimously. As we gathered our materials after adjournment, Catherine approached me. That was impressive, Rachel. Where has this voice been hiding all these years? I considered the question carefully. It wasn't hiding. It just wasn't being heard. Her expression softened with understanding. Well, we're listening now. And just between us, she lowered her voice, many of us have been waiting for someone to challenge Deborah's influence over community priorities. That woman has been running this town by proxy for too long. I felt a twinge of discomfort at the conspiratorial tone. This isn't about Deborah. It's about ensuring our community works for everyone. Catherine studied me with newfound respect. Of course, but don't underestimate what you've set in motion. Things are changing in Millstone Creek, and you're at the center of it. Walking home through the mild spring evening, I mulled over her words. I hadn't sought to become a catalyst for community change. I'd simply reached my breaking point after years of silent sacrifice and subtle humiliation. Yet change was undeniably occurring. The dynamics of Millstone Creek were shifting like tectonic plates, slowly but inexorably, creating a new landscape I was still learning to navigate. My phone chimed with a text from Emily. Dinner's ready when you get home. Tyler stopped by with information about the financial literacy program. Interesting ideas. We're talking about piloting it at the diner for the waitstaff first. I smiled at the unexpected collaboration between my daughter and the young man whose education I had secretly helped fund. Their renewed connection, was perhaps the most surprising outcome of my public revelation. A bridge rebuilt from the ruins of our family's complicated history. As I turned onto my street, I noticed a figure sitting on my front porch steps. Even in the fading light, I recognized James's sister, Marie. We'd been close once in the early years after his death, but had gradually drifted apart, partly due to geographic distance. When she moved to Oregon, but also because of something less tangible, a growing disconnect I had never fully understood. "Marie," I called as I approached. "What a surprise!" She stood, engulfing me in a hug that smelled of the same perfume she'd worn for 20 years. "Rachel, it's so good to see you. When did you get to town? You should have called." "I got in this morning," she said, pulling back to study my face. "Emily knew I was coming. We wanted to surprise you." We settled on the porch swing that James had installed the summer before his accident, its chains now somewhat rusted but still functional. "Emily told me what happened," Marie said after a moment. "About the money, about Deborah Simmons and her son." I sighed, suddenly weary of the story that had come to define me in recent weeks. "It's been quite a month. I'm not surprised you helped them," Marie said quietly. "You've always been generous to a fault, but I am surprised you kept it from Emily. From me." There was hurt in her voice, the lingering echo of a sister-in-law who had once been like a sister to me. "I was ashamed," I admitted. "Not of helping initially, but of letting it continue for so long. Of not setting boundaries. Of putting another child's opportunities before my own daughter's." Marie was silent for a long moment. "Do you remember what James always said about helping others?" I smiled sadly. "Give until it feels good, not until it hurts." "Exactly. My brother was generous, but he knew where to draw the line. That woman took advantage of your grief, Rachel. She saw your vulnerability after losing James and exploited it." The assessment was harsh, but not entirely inaccurate. In the raw years after James's death, Deborah had been a constant presence, organizing meal trains, helping with Emily's school events, becoming the friend I desperately needed. The financial requests had begun only after she'd firmly established herself as my emotional support system. "I let it happen," I said. "For years, I chose to believe her excuses because the alternative meant admitting I'd been manipulated." Marie took my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "But you finally stood up. James would have been so proud of you." The mention of my late husband's approval brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "I hope so. I know so," Marie insisted. "And that's partly why I'm here. There's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you years ago." Her serious tone set off warning bells. "What is it?" Marie took a deep breath. "After James died, he left a separate insurance policy, one you don't know about. He made me the trustee, with specific instructions about when to tell you." I stared at her, uncomprehending. "What? That's not possible. We went through all his paperwork together." "Not all of it," Marie said gently. "James set this up the year Emily was born. He made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would hold it in trust until either you remarried or Emily turned 25. My mind raced, trying to process this revelation. "But Emily turned 25 last month." Marie nodded. "That's why I'm here. The policy value has grown considerably over the years. It's now worth just over $175,000. The figure hung in the air between us, almost incomprehensible. More than enough to pay off my mortgage. More than enough to cover Emily's student loans. More than enough to undo years of financial struggle." "Why wouldn't he tell me about this?" I whispered. "Because he knew you, Rachel. He knew you'd use it immediately for everyone else's needs, before your own. He wanted to ensure you and Emily would have long-term security, not just immediate relief." The realization of James's foresight, his understanding of my nature and its potential pitfalls, left me speechless. Even from beyond the grave, he had sought to protect me from my own excessive generosity. "There's a letter," Marie added, reaching into her purse and extracting an envelope, yellowed with age. "He wrote it the day the policy was finalized. He asked me to give it to you along with the news." With trembling fingers, I accepted the envelope, recognizing immediately the bold strokes of James's handwriting spelling my name. For 18 years, these words had waited patiently to reach me, preserved by his sister's loyalty to his wishes. The community feedback session for the library annex project was scheduled for 7:00 p.m. at the elementary school gymnasium. By 6:30, every folding chair was filled, with latecomers lining the walls and sitting cross-legged on the polished floor. I've never seen this many people at a community meeting, Mayor Holloway murmured as we prepared our presentation materials. Your outreach strategy clearly worked. I had spent weeks ensuring the session would be truly inclusive, arranging childcare in the adjoining cafeteria, scheduling around shift workers' hours, providing translation services for our growing Spanish-speaking population, and personally inviting residents who rarely participated in community governance. People come when they believe they'll actually be heard, I replied, surveying the diverse crowd with satisfaction. Among the attendees, I spotted familiar faces. Emily and Tyler setting up a table with information about their financial literacy initiative. Marie, who had extended her visit to help with community outreach. Teachers from the elementary school. Waitstaff from the diner where Emily worked. And residents from all corners of Millstone Creek. Noticeably absent was Deborah Simmons. Since our confrontation in my living room, she had retreated from public life, still living in her beautiful home on the west side, but no longer orchestrating community events or holding court at school functions. I felt no satisfaction in her withdrawal. Despite everything, I understood the humiliation of having one's carefully constructed image publicly dismantled. The difference was that mine had happened gradually over years of quiet sacrifice, while hers had collapsed in a single evening. As the meeting began, I stepped forward to introduce the library annex proposal. The crowd quieted, faces turning toward me with an attentiveness I was still learning to accept. For 15 years, I began, I've worked at Millstone Elementary, watching children discover the joy of reading. I've seen how access to books and learning resources transforms lives, but I've also seen how that access is unequally distributed in our community. I gestured toward the detailed maps and demographic charts displayed on easels beside me. 28% of Millstone Creek residents live more than 2 miles from our current library. For families without reliable transportation, for seniors with mobility issues, for children whose parents work multiple jobs, that distance might as well be 20 miles. Nods of recognition rippled through the audience. The proposed annex isn't just about more books on shelves, it's about creating a community hub where everyone belongs, with extended hours for working families, technology access for job seekers, quiet study spaces for students, and programs that reflect the diverse needs of our changing town. For the next hour, community members asked questions, offered suggestions, and shared personal stories about what the library meant to them. The engagement was thoughtful, respectful, and genuinely collaborative, exactly what I had hoped for. As the formal portion concluded and people broke into discussion groups, I found myself approached by an elderly man I recognized as Mr. Abernathy, who had lived in Millstone Creek since before it was incorporated as a town. "Ms. Monroe," he said, leaning heavily on his cane, "I want to tell you something." I smiled encouragingly. "Of course, Mr. Abernathy. Your husband, James, he once helped me repair my roof after a storm. Wouldn't take a dime for it. Said that's what neighbors do." The old man's eyes grew misty with remembrance. "When I heard what you'd done for the Simmons boy all these years, I thought, there's James's wife, carrying on his way of looking after folks." His words touched something deep within me, a connection to James that felt both painful and profoundly comforting. "Thank you for telling me that," I said softly. Mr. Abernathy nodded. "But you know what else James was good at? Knowing when someone was taking advantage. He had a kind heart but a clear eye." He patted my arm gently. "Seems to me you've found that balance too now." As he shuffled away, I reflected on his observation. Had I finally found the equilibrium that had eluded me since James's death? The ability to be generous without being exploited, to help others without diminishing myself? My gaze drifted to Emily across the room, animatedly discussing the financial literacy program with a group of young parents. Beside her stood Tyler, his attentive posture and thoughtful responses revealing a maturity beyond his years. 2 young people finding their paths, one whose journey I had sacrificed to support, and one whose journey I had inadvertently complicated through that same sacrifice. Yet, here they were, collaborating on something meaningful, creating something positive from the tangled history between our families. Later that evening, as volunteers stacked chairs and gathered materials, Emily approached with Tyler, following a few steps behind. "Mom, the feedback for the literacy program was incredible," she said excitedly. "We already have 15 people signed up for the pilot workshop." "That's wonderful," I replied, genuinely pleased by her enthusiasm. Tyler cleared his throat. "Mrs. Monroe, we were wondering if you'd consider being a guest speaker for the first session. Your perspective on financial boundaries would be uniquely valuable. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. You want me to teach others about financial boundaries? Actually, yes, Emily said. Seriously. Who better to explain the importance of boundaries than someone who learned their value the hard way? Their request gave me pause. For years, I had hidden my financial choices out of shame and embarrassment. The idea of deliberately sharing that experience as a cautionary tale, as something potentially helpful to others, was both terrifying and strangely liberating. I'll think about it, I promised. As they walked away, deep in conversation about curriculum development, Mayor Holloway approached. That was quite a success, he said, gesturing toward the dispersing crowd. The library annex proposal has clearly struck a chord with the community. I nodded, gathering my notes. People need spaces that welcome everyone, regardless of income or status. Indeed, he agreed. Which brings me to a somewhat delicate matter. He lowered his voice slightly. The naming of the annex. I looked up, surprised. I assumed it would simply be the Millstone Creek Library East Branch or something similar. The mayor shook his head. The board is unanimous in wanting to name it after someone who embodies the spirit of community service and literacy advocacy. We'd like to call it the James Monroe Memorial Library Annex. The suggestion caught me completely off guard. James had been gone for 18 years, long enough that many newer residents of Millstone Creek had never known him. Yet his legacy had somehow endured, preserved in stories like Mr. Abernathy's, and in the values I had tried, however imperfectly, to uphold. That's very generous, I managed, emotion, threatening to overwhelm me. But James wasn't particularly involved with the library. No, the mayor agreed. But from what I've heard, he was deeply committed to ensuring everyone in this community had equal opportunities to thrive. That's exactly what this annex represents. I considered his words carefully. May I suggest an alternative? The Monroe Family Learning Center? That way it honors not just James, but Emily's contributions through her children's programs and, I hesitated before adding, and my own advocacy work. Mayor Holloway smiled warmly. I think that's an excellent suggestion. I'll propose it at the next board meeting. As I walked home that evening, I felt James's presence more strongly than I had in years, not as a painful absence, but as an enduring influence that had shaped my choices, my values, and ultimately, my ability to reclaim my voice. At home, I made a cup of tea and settled into the armchair by the living room window. From the side table, I picked up James's letter, the one Marie had delivered. I had read it dozens of times since receiving it, each reading revealing new layers of meaning. My dearest Rachel, if you're reading this, 2 things have happened. I'm no longer with you, and our Emily has turned 25. I hope I live to see her reach that milestone, but if not, I trust that you have guided her into becoming the remarkable woman I already see glimpses of in her 6-year-old determination. This insurance policy comes to you now because I know you, my love. I know your generous heart. I know how you put everyone else's needs before your own. It's one of the countless reasons I fell in love with you, but it's also why I've set up this safeguard. This money is for you, not for the neighbor who can't make rent, not for the coworker with medical bills, not for anyone but you and Emily. Use it to breathe, to build security, to create the life you deserve without constantly worrying about the next emergency. Remember what we talked about on our first anniversary sitting on that terrible sofa in our apartment? How we defined wealth not as having everything, but as having enough to share without fear? This is my way of helping you reach that definition of wealth, even if I couldn't be there to build it with you. All my love, always. James, I traced my fingers over his signature, feeling the indentation of his pen on the paper, one of the last physical connections to the man who had known me better than I sometimes knew myself. The letter had arrived at precisely the moment I needed its wisdom most, just as I was learning to redefine my place in the community, to establish healthier boundaries, to value my own needs alongside others. James had anticipated this moment 18 years ago. Somehow, he had known that I would need this reminder, this permission, this final gift of security. Outside my window, Millstone Creek settled into evening quietude, porch lights illuminating small gatherings of neighbors, children reluctantly heading indoors as dusk deepened, the distant sound of the high school band practicing for the upcoming Memorial Day parade. This was my community. Imperfect, evolving, but mine. Not because I had sacrificed for it, but because I belonged to it, had shaped it in my quiet way, and was now helping to reshape it more deliberately. The insurance money remained untouched in the account Marie had established. I had decisions to make about it. Thoughtful, intentional decisions that would honor James's wishes while supporting the future Emily and I were building. But those decisions could wait. For now, it was enough to sit in this moment of hard-won equilibrium, balancing gratitude for the past with hope for what lay ahead. 6 months after the community meeting that changed everything, autumn painted Millstone Creek in shades of amber and crimson. Construction on the Monroe Family Learning Center had begun, marked by a groundbreaking ceremony that drew the largest crowd in recent town history. Standing beside the ceremonial shovel, Emily and I had exchanged glances of quiet amazement at how far we'd come. The financial literacy program that Emily and Tyler had developed was now being implemented in 3 neighboring towns, with a waiting list for each session. What had begun as a modest attempt at reconciliation between our families had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated, a genuine vocation and thriving partnership. As for me, I had settled into my role on the Community Development Advisory Board with increasing confidence, finding my voice growing stronger with each meeting. The insurance money from James remained largely untouched, though I had followed his wishes by using a small portion to finally replace my 15-year-old car and schedule the dental work I'd postponed for far too long. On this particular Saturday morning, I sat at my kitchen table reviewing grant applications for community wellness initiatives, when a knock at my door interrupted my concentration. Opening it, I found Deborah Simmons standing on my porch, looking markedly different from the polished, intimidating figure she had once presented. Her designer clothes had been replaced by simple jeans and a sweater. Her perfectly highlighted hair now showed strands of natural gray, but the most striking change was in her expression, the defensive arrogance replaced by something more complex and vulnerable. "Rachel," she said, her voice lacking its usual commanding tone. "May I speak with you?" I hesitated briefly before stepping aside. "Come in." We settled in the living room, the same space where, months earlier, she had attempted to justify years of financial manipulation. The silence between us was heavy with history and unresolved feelings. "I've been in therapy," Deborah said finally, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her purse. "Twice weekly since everything happened." I nodded but remained silent, waiting. "My therapist suggested I make amends to those I've hurt," she continued. "You're at the top of that list." Something inside me softened slightly at her evident discomfort. This clearly wasn't easy for her. "Tyler tells me the repayment plan is going well," I said, offering a neutral topic. "Yes, he's very committed to it." Pride flickered briefly across her features before fading into shame. "Though the money is only part of what I owe you." She took a deep breath. "Rachel, I came to apologize, truly apologize, for what I did. Not just the money, but the way I treated you for years. The comparisons, the subtle put-downs, the way I used your kindness while simultaneously diminishing you in front of others." Her voice cracked slightly. It was cruel and inexcusable. The directness of her admission caught me off guard. I had expected justifications, perhaps even renewed attempts to minimize what had happened. This raw acknowledgement was something entirely different. "Why?" I asked simply. It was the question that had lingered beneath all the others. "We were friends once, Deborah. At least I thought we were." Pain flashed across her face. "We were. That's what makes this so much worse." She seemed to struggle for words. "When Mark left me, something broke inside me. I was so terrified of being seen as a failure that I created this perfect facade. And maintaining it became more important than anything. More important than honesty. More important than friendship." I remembered those early days after her divorce, how desperate she had seemed, how I had wanted to help her through what I perceived as temporary hardship. "My therapist calls it pathological impression management," Deborah continued. "I became so fixated on how others perceived me that I lost sight of who I actually was. And you," her voice caught, "you were everything I wasn't. Authentic, humble, genuinely good. So you took advantage of those qualities." I finished for her. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "At first, I really did intend to pay you back, but then it became easier to just keep taking. And the more I took, the more I resented you for giving, as if your generosity was somehow a personal indictment of my character." The psychological insight surprised me. Deborah had clearly been doing the difficult work of self-examination. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she added quickly. "I don't deserve that. But I wanted you to know that I understand what I did, and I'm truly, deeply sorry for the pain I caused you and Emily." We sat in silence for several moments, the weight of her confession hanging between us. Outside, fallen leaves skittered across my front yard, carried by an October breeze. "Thank you for your apology," I said finally. "It means something to hear you acknowledge what happened." Relief softened her features. "There's something else I wanted to tell you. I've decided to sell my house." This was unexpected news. Deborah's home, a sprawling colonial on Millstone Creek's west side, had been the setting for countless community gatherings and the visible symbol of her carefully cultivated success. "Where will you go?" I asked. "A small condo. Downtown. The proceeds from the house will help accelerate Tyler's repayment to you and pay off my own considerable debt." She gave a rueful smile. "Turns out maintaining appearances is extraordinarily expensive." I couldn't help but note the irony. For years, I had envied the beautiful home that had apparently been as much a financial strain for her as my modest house had sometimes been for me. "Are you sure that's what you want?" Deborah nodded. "It's what I need. A fresh start with less performance." She hesitated before adding, "I've also resigned from most of my community positions. I think Millstone Creek has had quite enough of my influence for a while." As she prepared to leave, Deborah paused at the door. Emily and Tyler seemed to be working well together on their program. "They are," I agreed. "They make a good team." A complicated emotion crossed her face, something between pride and regret. "Tyler says she's brilliant at curriculum development, that she sees needs others miss." "She always has," I said simply. Deborah nodded. "Rachel, whatever happens between us, I'm glad our children have found a way forward that isn't defined by our mistakes." After she left, I stood on my porch watching her walk down the street, her posture less rigid than I remembered, her pace unhurried. I wasn't ready to forgive her fully, wasn't sure I ever would be, but her visit had loosened something inside me, a knot of resentment I hadn't realized was still there. Later that afternoon, I met Marie for lunch at the new cafe that had opened downtown. Since her visit 6 months ago, we had rebuilt our relationship through regular phone calls and video chats, gradually reclaiming the closeness we had once shared. "So," she said after we ordered, "Deborah Simmons came to apologize. That's unexpected." "News travels fast," I observed with a small smile. Marie shrugged. "Emily called me. She's protective of you." "She is," I agreed, warmed by my daughter's concern. But the apology seemed genuine. "Deborah's been through some significant self-reflection. And does that change anything for you?" I considered the question carefully. "It doesn't erase what happened, but it helps me make sense of it. And there's value in that." Marie nodded thoughtfully. "James always said you had an unusual capacity for seeing the humanity in difficult people." "He did. All the time. He said it was your superpower and your vulnerability." Marie's expression grew serious. "Speaking of James, have you decided what to do with the insurance money?" The question had occupied much of my thinking in recent months. "Parts of it, yes. I've established a college fund for Emily's future children, should she choose to have them. And I've set aside enough to ensure the financial literacy program can continue even if grant funding fluctuates." "And the rest?" I smiled, feeling a quiet certainty about the decision I had reached after weeks of careful consideration. "I'm establishing a scholarship fund, the James Monroe Community Builder Scholarship. It will support Millstone Creek students who demonstrate exceptional commitment to community service." Marie's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Rachel, he would have loved that." "I think so too," I said softly. "It feels right, using his gift to create opportunities for others while honoring his values." As we finished our lunch, Mayor Holloway entered the cafe, spotting us immediately and approaching our table. "Rachel, Marie, good afternoon." He greeted us warmly. "I'm glad I ran into you, Rachel. I wanted to let you know that the State Library Association has selected you for their Community Advocate of the Year award. The ceremony is next month in the Capitol." Surprise rendered me momentarily speechless. "That's unexpected. I'm not even a librarian." "No," he agreed, "but your advocacy for the Monroe Family Learning Center has become something of a model for other communities looking to expand library services in underserved areas. They're particularly impressed by your inclusive approach to community feedback and planning." After he left, Marie reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "James would be bursting with pride right now." I smiled, feeling his presence in her words. "I think he somehow knew I would find my way here eventually." That letter of his. It's almost as if he could see the future I would need to build. Not the future, Marie corrected gently. He saw you, your strength, your capacity for growth, your fundamental goodness. He knew those qualities would eventually lead you to claim your place, whatever that turned out to be. Walking home through the town center, I passed the construction site for the Monroe Family Learning Center. The foundation had been poured, and the skeletal framework was beginning to take shape. A large sign displayed the architectural rendering, a welcoming single-story building with large windows and a covered porch area. Emily stood near the site, deep in conversation with the project manager, her expression animated as she gestured toward the developing structure. At 25, she had blossomed into a confident young woman, recently promoted to full-time children's program coordinator at the main library and actively involved in planning the annex's youth services. She spotted me and waved, excusing herself from the conversation to join me. They're ahead of schedule, she reported excitedly. The project manager thinks we might be able to open by late spring instead of summer. That's wonderful news, I said, linking my arm through hers as we continued walking. Mayor Holloway just told me about the State Library Association Award. Emily beamed. I may have nominated you for that, with about 15 supporting letters from community members. I raised an eyebrow. Is that so? And when were you planning to tell me? When you won, she replied with a grin. Which you did. Mom, people recognize what you've done here, how you've changed. The conversation about community resources and who deserves them. Her words warmed me, but I shook my head slightly. I didn't do it alone, Emily. No, she agreed, but you were the catalyst. Your honesty that night at the community meeting, it forced everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about how this town really works. We paused at the corner where our paths would diverge, Emily heading to her afternoon shift at the library, me to a meeting with the grant committee. Tyler and I are finalizing the spring curriculum for the financial literacy program, she mentioned. We're adding a new module on emotional boundaries and financial decisions. We were hoping you might help develop it. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. You want the woman who secretly funded someone else's child for 15 years to teach about financial boundaries? Emily's expression grew serious. Yes, actually, because you understand better than most how complicated those boundaries can be, especially when they're tangled up with love, obligation, and community expectations. Looking at my daughter, wise beyond her years, compassionate but clear-eyed, I felt a surge of pride so intense it nearly took my breath away. Despite my mistakes, despite the resources diverted from her future to Tyler's, she had emerged as a remarkable young woman with a profound understanding of human complexity. I'd be honored to help, I said. The grand opening of the Monroe Family Learning Center fell on a perfect spring day, exactly 18 months after the community meeting that had set everything in motion. Sunshine bathed the new building, highlighting its welcoming design, wide steps leading to a covered porch, large windows letting in natural light, and an entrance plaza featuring a sculpture of an open book. As chairperson of the Library Expansion Committee, I stood beside Mayor Holloway at the podium, surveying the crowd that had gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. More than 300 people filled the plaza, representing every neighborhood and demographic in Millstone Creek. In the front row sat Emily, radiant in the blue dress she had purchased for the occasion. Beside her was Tyler, who had taken the day off from his job in the city to attend. Marie had flown in from Oregon, bringing with her James's parents, now in their 80s, but determined to witness this tribute to their son's legacy. Today marks not just the opening of a building, Mayor Holloway began, but the beginning of a new chapter for Millstone Creek, one where community resources truly serve the entire community. He spoke about the innovative programs the center would house: after-school tutoring for students, digital literacy classes for seniors, language instruction for the town's growing immigrant population, and the financial education program that had already helped dozens of residents improve their economic stability. None of this would have been possible, he continued, without the vision, persistence, and moral courage of one individual who reminded us what true community leadership looks like. He turned to me, extending his arm in invitation. Rachel Monroe, would you do us the honor of cutting the ribbon on the center that bears your family name? As I stepped forward, the crowd erupted in applause. Through a blur of tears, I saw familiar faces, colleagues from the elementary school, neighbors who had supported my quiet campaign for years, students from Emily and Tyler's financial literacy classes, and board members who had become friends and allies. In the audience, back row stood Deborah Simmons, more subdued than I had ever seen her, but present nonetheless. Our eyes met briefly across the crowd, and she offered a small nod of acknowledgement. Not friendship exactly, but a recognition of the journey that had brought us to this moment. Taking the ceremonial scissors, I turned to address the gathering. 18 years ago, I lost my husband James, a man who believed deeply in the power of community to lift up every one of its members. In the years that followed, I struggled to honor that belief while raising our daughter and finding my own place in Millstone Creek. I glanced at Emily, who smiled encouragingly through her own tears. Along the way, I made mistakes. I lost sight of boundaries. I allowed myself to be silenced when I should have spoken. But I also learned valuable lessons about generosity, resilience, and the courage to stand in your truth. The crowd had grown quiet, listening intently. This learning center represents what's possible when a community truly sees all of its members, not just the loudest voices or the most privileged perspectives. It's a place where everyone belongs, where resources are shared equitably, and where we recognize that lifting each other up makes us all stronger. I turned toward the gleaming new building, sunlight reflecting off its windows. James used to say that true wealth isn't measured by what you have, but by what you can afford to share without fear. My hope is that this center becomes a place where that kind of wealth is created and distributed freely, through knowledge, through connection, through opportunity. With those words, I cut the ribbon. Cheers erupted as the doors officially opened, welcoming the community into the space we had created together. As people streamed inside to explore the new facility, Emily made her way to my side, slipping her arm around my waist. "Dad would have loved this," she said softly. "Yes," I agreed, leaning into her embrace. "I think he would. You know what else he would have loved? Seeing you finally step into your power." The observation caught me by surprise. "My power?" Emily nodded. "You've always had this quiet strength, Mom, but for years you let others define you. As the widow, as the modest school secretary, as the background figure in community affairs. Now you're defining yourself." Her insight struck me deeply. She was right. I had allowed others to determine my role in Millstone Creek for far too long, had accepted limitations that were never really mine to bear. As we moved through the building, community members stopped us to express their excitement about specific features. The technology lab with free internet access, the children's reading nook with its comfortable window seats, the community meeting, room available to neighborhood groups at no cost. Near the main circulation desk, I noticed Tyler deep in conversation with James's parents, showing them the financial literacy program materials with evident pride. Seeing me approach, he excused himself to join us. "Mrs. Monroe," he said warmly, "this place is incredible. The impact it's going to have on Millstone Creek." He shook his head in admiration. "Thank you, Tyler," I replied. "And please, after all this time, I think you can call me Rachel." He smiled, a hint of his old boyish charm breaking through his professional demeanor. "Old habits, but I'll try." He glanced at Emily before continuing. "I wanted to let you both know that I've accepted a position with the State Economic Development Office. I'll be working on financial inclusion initiatives for underserved communities." "That's wonderful news," I said, genuinely pleased for him. "It's directly inspired by what you two have built with the literacy program," he admitted. "Seeing how practical financial education can change lives, it's shown me where I can make the most meaningful contribution." As Tyler moved away to greet other attendees, Emily squeezed my hand. "See? Good things ripple outward in ways we can never predict." The observation was profound in its simplicity and deeply true. My initial help to Tyler, though eventually twisted by Deborah's manipulation, had nonetheless contributed to shaping a young man committed to helping others. The painful revelation at the community meeting had catalyzed positive changes throughout Millstone Creek. Even my mistakes had ultimately led to growth and transformation. Later that afternoon, as the crowd thinned and staff began preparing for the center's first official day of operation, I found myself alone in the small reading garden behind the building. Designed as a quiet retreat, it featured benches placed among flowering shrubs, a small fountain, and a bronze plaque bearing James's favorite quote, about community. I sat on a bench, listening to the gentle splash of the fountain and reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. From the grieving young widow struggling to raise a child alone, to the quiet secretary diverting resources to help a neighbor's son, to the woman who had finally found her voice and used it to create meaningful change. It's peaceful back here. I looked up to find Marie approaching, carrying 2 cups of tea from the center's small cafe. "I thought you might need a moment of quiet," she said, handing me one of the cups and settling beside me on the bench. "Thank you." I sipped the tea gratefully. "It's been quite a day." Marie nodded, her gaze taking in the garden. "I was just thinking about something James used to say whenever he finished a difficult construction project. 'The blueprint is just the beginning,'" I quoted with a smile, remembering my husband's favorite phrase. "Exactly." Marie's eyes were warm with shared memory. "I think that applies here too. You've built something remarkable, Rachel, but it's just the beginning of what this place will become for Millstone Creek." We sat in companionable silence, watching as golden, late afternoon light filtered through the newly planted trees. Through the center's windows, I could see Emily conducting an impromptu tour for a group of teenagers, her animation visible even from a distance. "She's so much like him," Marie observed, following my gaze. "That same natural ability to connect with people, to make them feel valued." "Yes," I agreed. "But she has her own unique strengths, too. I've learned so much from watching her navigate the world with such authenticity." "James would say the same about you," Marie said gently. "He always admired how you moved through the world with such genuine kindness." The mention of James's admiration warmed me. Though 18 years had passed since his death, his influence remained a constant presence in my life, a North Star, guiding my decisions, a standard against which I measured my actions. "I made a decision about the remaining insurance money," I told Marie. "In addition to the scholarship fund, I'm establishing a small foundation to support community-based financial education. Emily and Tyler will serve as founding board members." Marie smiled approvingly. "Perfect. Using James's gift to extend the work you've already begun. And ensuring it continues beyond any single program or building," I added, "creating sustainable change." As evening approached, the center staff began gently ushering out the last visitors. Emily found us in the garden, her face flushed with excitement and fatigue. "They're closing up for the day," she reported, collapsing onto the bench beside me. "First official day of operation tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp." "How many people came through today?" Marie asked. "Over 500, Emily said proudly, "and nearly 100 new library card applications." I felt a profound sense of satisfaction at those numbers. 500 people, a quarter of Millstone Creek's population, had chosen to spend part of their Saturday exploring this new community resource. "We should head home," I suggested. "It's been a long day." As we walked toward the parking lot, I paused for one last look at the building, its warm lights glowing against the deepening twilight, the sign bearing our family name clearly visible from the street. The Monroe Family Learning Center. Not a monument to wealth or status, but a testament to the power of persistence, truth, and community investment. I thought about the long path that had led here, from that first check written to help Tyler stay in college, to the community meeting where I had finally spoken my truth, to this moment of quiet triumph. So much had changed in 18 months. The community dynamics had shifted. New voices were being heard in Millstone Creek. Resources were being distributed more equitably. And I had discovered a capacity for leadership I hadn't known I possessed. As we reached my car, Emily suddenly wrapped her arms around me in a fierce hug. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," she whispered. I held her tight, this remarkable young woman who had weathered the consequences of my mistakes with such grace and emerged stronger for it. "I'm proud of us," I replied. Driving home through the familiar streets of Millstone Creek, I felt James's presence more strongly than I had in years, not as a painful absence, but as a benevolent guide who had somehow anticipated the journey I would need to make. His insurance policy had arrived at precisely the moment I was ready to receive it, when I had finally learned to value my own needs alongside others, to establish healthy boundaries, to use my voice for positive change. As we turned onto our street, the setting sun cast long shadows across front yards where children played and neighbors chatted. This was the community James and I had chosen together all those years ago. Imperfect but resilient, capable of growth and transformation. I had once believed my role here was to serve quietly from the sidelines, to give endlessly without expectation of return. Now I understood a deeper truth. True community required each member to bring their authentic self to the table, their strengths, their needs, their voice. For too long, I had offered only partial participation, hiding behind a mask of selfless giving while burying my own needs and opinions. In finding the courage to remove that mask, I had discovered not just my voice, but my rightful place. In the community I called home. You know what Dad would say right now? Emily asked as we pulled into our driveway. I smiled, hearing James's voice in my mind as clearly as if he were sitting beside me. He'd say, "The best investments are the ones that keep giving returns long after you've forgotten making them." Emily nodded, her eyes bright with shared memory. Exactly. As we walked up the path to our front door, the same modest home where I had raised my daughter, supported a neighbor's son, and eventually found the courage to reclaim my own narrative, I reflected on those words. My silent investment in Tyler had yielded unexpected returns. A community transformed, a daughter who had found her calling, a young man committed to paying forward the opportunities he'd received, and my own emergence as a voice for equity and inclusion. Not the returns I had anticipated when writing that first check 15 years ago, but perhaps the ones I had needed most all along.